Good afternoon, welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Pate for Barlow High School. Today we're talking about Israel. This might seem like kind of a strange topic for U.S. history, but it's really not. U.S. history is influenced a little bit in the 1950s, a little bit in the early 1960s, but quite significantly in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Really, frankly, throughout the 1970s, the oil shocks and the energy crisis that hit the United States are directly a result of what's going on here with Israel. So we're going to take a little bit of a look at Israel right after we finish World War II. We're moving into the Cold War. We're going to stop right here and just kind of get an understanding of what really goes on and have some context to things that come later on. Alright, first thing is historical claims. We're going to look at both the Israeli perspective and the Palestinian perspective, try and be as objective and fair as possible. So, all of this area here was considered ancient Israel, okay? And we're talking going back about 1000 BC up to about 70 AD, okay? You're going to see that this is a period of time where whether they are in control of their own circumstances or occupied by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Romans, the Jewish people are the people who live there. They're the residents, whether or not they're in charge. Okay, part of the time they're in charge, part of the time they're occupied force. But this is their claim, and it's about a 1,000-year period of time. Okay, and as we go into Prophet Muhammad comes on the scene at 630 AD, and he is going to launch an empire, this Empire of Islam. They are going to be in control of this territory from, well, a little after 600 all the way up until World War I. So you have over a 1,000-year period of time that the ancient Jewish people were in control of this territory and considered it their homeland. And then you have it settled. And why is it settled by Palestinians? Why is it not the Jewish people anymore? I guess I should go back to that. In about 67 AD through 70 AD, there is a huge Jewish uprising that occurred, and it led to the Romans basically destroying the second temple that had been built. And after they destroy the temple, they are going to do what's called the Great Diaspora. And this is how you end up with Jewish people in Europe who are getting affected by the Holocaust. They permanently relocate into Europe, into what becomes Russia, into North Africa, and sprinkled around Asia Minor and the Middle East. They just take the Jewish people out and basically move all of them outside of what you would consider Israel today. So they're all over the place. So why is Hitler persecuting Jews in Germany and Eastern Europe and Russia, etc.? It's because of the Great Diaspora around AD 73 by the Romans as kind of punishment for this big Jewish uprising that occurred. So they're spread all over. This area then gets filled in by Palestinians. Now that takes us up to World War I. World War I is going to be a time where essentially you have, after World War I is over, the Ottoman Empire and the Austro-Hungarian empires are both broken up. You have major shift in land boundaries. And we've already talked about what that meant for Eastern Europe on a previous video related to World War I and World War II. But now we're looking at this becomes an area that is ultimately, it says international zone, it's eventually going to be controlled by the British as a result of this Sykes-Picot Agreement. They divided up the former Ottoman holdings and decided who would be in charge of each between the British and French after they took things away from the Germans. Now, as part of this, you have, after the Sykes-Picot Agreement where they agreed to distribute these lands, you get the Balfour Declaration. Right there. Balfour basically says that His Majesty's government, that'd be Great Britain, views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. This is the golden ticket for Jewish people in Europe who long to return back to what they consider the Promised Land, back to ancient Israel. The British government, which is, because of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, going to end up in charge, they are saying, we'll do what we can and we recognize your right to exist. That was the golden ticket for the Jewish people. They're very excited and they start trying to organize to get that to become a reality. So what do? This period that follows World War I and goes up to World War II is called the Mandate Period. During this period of time, based on the Balfour Declaration, Jewish immigration swells. You start having Jewish organizations that are kind of worldwide, but mostly in Europe and Russia, trying to help people get back to being in ancient Israel and buy land. This is not opposed by the British, and it's really not opposed by the Palestinians until the 1930s. Okay, they're going to just keep coming, buy more and more land, and they're just kind of taking possession in a very legal way. So this Jewish immigration goes on. Along with the Jewish immigration, you get the Jewish organizational efforts. You have a much larger faction of Israelis, Jewish people, Israelis back then that were in the Hagamah. A little bit smaller group in the Irgun, but a significant group. The lady group, I mean, these are extremists willing to fight, willing to die, willing to kill. It's a much smaller group that was there. The Hagamah is going to start funding something and developing something called the Jewish Agency. They basically build their own shadow government in this land. They start setting up infrastructure and utilities, okay, which are basic elements of society. They start to train their own militia. They offer to help the British police the area if they can get some military training out of it and some weapons. So they start helping the British and getting trained and doing this. So they are developing their own government. They are developing their own infrastructure and like things a city or a state needs to have. They are developing their own military. So they're putting all the elements together to basically have a civilized, functional society, and that's what they're doing. During this period of time in the 1920s and 1930s. They are very busy for 20 years getting ready to be a country. And yet at the same time, when we do have these Jewish factions I already talked about, at the same time you have Arab inaction. At this time, the Palestinians really aren't doing anything, and their neighbors aren't really too concerned about it at this time. Okay? They are not developing their own government, their own military, their own society, infrastructure, utilities, any of these elements that the Jewish people are. And you can see that when they get 25 years to get ready and the Palestinian Arabs do not have that time to get ready, it's going to make a significant difference. So at some point, well, 1936, 1937, it kind of becomes a situation where the Palestinians are going to freak out and say, you know what, they're buying up so much of our land, they've already asked for the immigration to be stopped, and they're saying that you're doing too much to help the Jewish people. And so it's called the Great Arab Revolt. It lasts between 1937 and 1939. The British are exhausted about this. Keep in mind what else also was happening in 1939, by the end of the Great Arab Revolt. Hitler is starting to take over all of Europe. You have appeasement that's been going on with the Munich Pact, and the fall of France is just around the corner. I mean, this is a very scary time in Europe. The British are not that interested. And because the Israelis have been willing to help them out in terms of keeping the peace, they have been more armed and more trained. And what the British get to is they say, fine, we'll split it. We'll give you each half of it. This doesn't make anyone happy. Both the Israelis and the British are unhappy with this possibility. And so you have this kind of tumultuous period. During World War II, as you may remember, right over here in Egypt, the British are holding on for dear life until the Battle of El Alamein and until the Battle of Tunisia, when this whole area, in North Africa is cleared out of the Axis. So during the period of World War II, as all of these things are going on, trying to defend Egypt, which would be right here, trying to clear the Axis out, and frankly, trying to get rid of the Germans in general and to defeat Nazi Germany, this is a minor concern. The British basically have a token force here and are arming and supplying and frankly supporting the Jewish people who have stepped up to say, we will fight off the Nazis, we will defend this territory. That's a welcome relief to the British who can't afford to be there. So, with all of this going on during World War II, by the time World War II finally gets done, you have a UN partition plan. The UN partition plan looks like this. All of the dark gray areas, hopefully you can see this pretty well, would have gone to the Jewish people. All of these striped areas that are lighter would go to the Palestinian people. And the United Nations, which is freshly minted itself after World War II, they're saying, hey, we're just going to have this. It's going to be great. Both of you have an equal chance to have some territory. It's the fairest thing we can do. Now, when this happens, the Jewish people are outnumbered big time. Why? Because Egypt and Transjordan and Syria don't like this plan at all. They're all furious, saying, how could you give some of this land away? Now keep in mind, both groups have a 1,000-year plus claim on the territory, but they're saying, you know what, how could you give away our land? So in support of the Palestinian people, and also for their own agenda reasons, they are going to, well, the Jewish people, the day before the UN is expected to leave, when they've announced this is the day they'll leave, all of these forces are ready to attack. The day before that, the Israelis just say, oh yeah, we're independent. And they declare their own independence, and they name their own first prime minister, and they fuse all of their kind of factions and military units into one called the Israeli Defense Force, and they're ready to go. They have bought weapons, they have trained heavily, and everyone thinks, oh, they're going to get wiped out, because the next day they get invaded by Egypt, Transjordan, and Syria, today's Jordan, of course. They're going to get invaded by all of those countries, and everyone thinks they're going to get destroyed. And yet, they are so much more prepared for this than their opponents, and they're going to get reinforced by President Truman. He is going to supply them with weapons, tanks, planes, all kinds of good things you want to have in a war, with U.S. support and the fact that they are very well prepared, much more so than their enemies. Because remember, these countries were all part of mandates as well, so they're pretty new governmental organizations running on their own. And yes, they have weapons and armies, but they're not first rate. Basically, the Israelis are going to wipe them out. And when they wipe them out, that's going to essentially mean, I don't know if you can see this map down here very well, all of the lighter areas are going to be taken control of by Israel. And that only leaves the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. These two striped areas here will be all that's left. Most of this territory, this area here, and all of this area down here are going to be, plus this area up here, are all taken over by Israel. And there are reasons they take it. Number one, they consider it, especially the hardliner groups say, this is our historical ancient birthright, this is our land we should have back. But there's also some really other good reasons. It gives them less division. I mean, this was a crazy system. How do you defend borders when you're split into three parts, basically? This allows them to have contiguous boundaries and borders, and it also geographically gives them stronger defensive positions. Remember, we talked about the Sudetenland with the Czechs, that when they lost that, they lost their strategically good defensive mountain ranges. Well, eventually we'll see that when they invade the Golan Heights and take that. There's great defensive boundaries in some locations. So this essentially, after this very quick war ends, this is what the result is. The Palestinians lose a lot of land, and frankly, some of the more radicals, the Lady Group, they are going to threaten a lot of Palestinians into leaving some of the Palestinian parts that were striped, getting out of those, and that becomes a big issue for today. The big issues Israel faces today, right of return. These Palestinian refugees who left under coercement, they want to go back, and they want their land back, or compensation, probably their land, most likely. And in return, you also have the Jewish people saying, nope, people have been living there for 60 years now, 70 years, nope, can't go back. Control over Jerusalem. Jerusalem's right in here. Control over the West Bank, having their own actual governments. And control over the Temple Mount, the Temple Mountain. Basically, where you have the remains of the old Jewish temple, and you have the modern Dome of the Rock, where it said that Muhammad ascended to heaven. They're both basically on the same little piece of real estate, which is highly contested. So it's a messy situation to this day. The bottom line, as far as the war goes, the bottom line is this. The U.S., from Truman on, has always absolutely steadfastly supported Israel. They, in several circumstances, have kept Israel afloat when they've been attacked by their neighbors, because you're going to see more attacks that take place. Okay? We'll come back and look at those in a future video, but with that happening, essentially what's going to be the situation is you're eventually going to see, by 1973, you're going to see retaliation by the Arabic neighbors through the means they have, which are oil. And when they do that, it's going to have a significant price to pay for the United States. There are some Cold War intrigues that fit into this in the 56 and 67 campaigns. We'll talk about those later. But until next time, stay classy, Sam Barlow.